The afternoon was warm, and the constant sound of horns filled the air on the busy road. Among the cars speeding by, an unexpected figure appeared, a medium-sized dog, with dusty fur and eyes shining with desperation. She ran back and forth, skillfully dodging the vehicles, but she didn't seem to be lost. There was something in her behavior that caught attention. She wasn't there by chance. Drivers began to slow down, some honked irritably, while others simply watched with intrigue. On the sidewalk, a small group of pedestrians formed, pointing at the animal. "Is she hurt?" someone asked. But contrary to what many expected, the dog showed no signs of aggression or fear. On the contrary, she seemed to be trying to communicate, as if begging for help. A young man, curious and cautious, decided to approach. He extended his hand but hesitated upon noticing the dog's intense gaze. It wasn't an ordinary look. It was as if she were trying to say something, to convey a message. She wasn't growling, she wasn't barking, she just stared intently, with a calmness that contrasted with the chaos around her. Have you ever seen an animal act in such a surprising way? What no one knew at that moment was that this encounter was just the beginning of something unbelievable. Before continuing, just check if you are already subscribed to the channel. Here you will find stories that will warm your heart. The small crowd forming on the sidewalk couldn't take their eyes off the scene. The dog, now standing at the curb, stared intently at the people, as if she were choosing someone to trust. There was something deeply unsettling in her expression. Her eyes, large and moist, conveyed a mix of pain and urgency that seemed impossible to ignore. It was as if she were carrying the weight of a request that couldn't be verbalized. Some young people, driven by curiosity, began to approach slowly. Among them, a guy in a blue t-shirt hesitated for a moment before taking the first step. He crouched down, extending his hand carefully, but kept a safe distance. The dog, however, did not back away. She remained still, watching every movement of the young man. There was no sign of aggression, just an unsettling calm, as if she knew she needed to be patient to be understood. "She seems to be in pain," a woman in the group murmured, while others nodded in agreement. But it wasn't physical pain. There were no visible injuries, nor signs that she was hurt. It was something deeper, something no one could immediately identify. Her stance was firm, but her eyes told a story that no one there could decipher. The young man in the blue t-shirt took another step forward, now confident that the dog posed no danger. He tried to pet her head, but the moment his hand got close, she jumped back slightly. It wasn't a move of fear, but of alertness. She didn't want affection. She wanted something more. Confused, the young man stepped back, looking to the others for answers that no one had. "She's trying to tell us something," another young person ventured, as the dog let out a small whimper, almost like a lament. The sound was low but filled with emotion, enough to make the group exchange glances, now even more intrigued. The tension in the air was palpable. What did she want? Why did she seem so desperate, yet so composed at the same time? The crowd began to grow, with more people stopping to watch the scene. Some took photos, while others just watched from a distance, too timid to approach. The dog, however, didn't seem interested in the commotion around her. Her focus remained fixed, as if she were waiting for someone to finally understand what she needed. And you, what would you do if you were in their place? Would you try to approach, or would you watch from afar? Share your thoughts. It was then that a middle-aged man, who had been merely observing from the sidewalk, decided to take action. He noticed something that no one else seemed to recognize. The dog wasn't there by chance. She had a purpose, and he was determined to find out what it was. I noticed you haven't left a like for this video yet. This is very important for YouTube to continue to share our content with exciting dog stories. Thank you. Now, let's continue. As the crowd remained indecisive, watching the dog with curiosity and caution, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a serene expression stepped forward. He wore a faded plaid shirt and held a hat in his hand, as if pondering what to do. Unlike the others, he didn't seem to hesitate. His eyes were fixed on the dog, but not with fear or distrust. He saw something that no one else did. "She's not lost," he said with a firm but calm voice. "She wants to show us something." The group around fell silent, watching as the man slowly crouched down to the dog's level. He extended his hand carefully, but without hesitation. The dog, who until then seemed wary of everyone, took a small step forward. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, it seemed that something was understood between the two. "It's okay, girl," the man murmured in a gentle tone. He extended his other hand and carefully touched the dog's dusty fur. She did not back away. On the contrary, she tilted her head slightly, as if she had finally found someone willing to listen. The man then did something no one expected. He hugged her. It was a simple gesture, but filled with empathy. The dog remained still for a few seconds before letting out a small sigh, as if she could finally trust. The crowd watched in silence, some moved by the scene. "Is she going to lead him somewhere?" a woman asked, breaking the silence. And that's exactly what happened. The dog stepped back, looking at the man, and then turned, walking toward the road. She glanced back once, as if asking him to follow her. The man, without hesitation, stood up and began to walk behind her. "Come on," he said, waving to the others. "She wants to take us somewhere." The crowd, still intrigued, began to follow them. The dog walked with determination, stopping every now and then to make sure the man and the others were keeping up. The group crossed the road and entered a small dirt path that led to a more secluded area. The sound of cars faded away, replaced by the singing of birds and the rustling of leaves. It was then that the dog stopped abruptly. She looked at the man and let out a louder whimper, pointing with her nose at something ahead. As the group approached, they saw what she was trying to show: an old well, surrounded by weeds and partially hidden by vegetation. The man looked inside and, at that moment, understood the reason for the dog's desperation. Have you ever seen an animal act so intelligently and emotionally? Let's chat in the comments. The silence was broken by a faint sound coming from inside the well. A sound that made everyone's heart tighten. The muffled cry of a puppy. The group slowly approached the well, while the dog remained by its side, staring intently inside. It was an old well, with stone edges worn by time and partially covered by leaves and dry branches. The vegetation around it made it almost imperceptible, but now, with everyone gathered there, it seemed to carry a weight that no one could ignore. The middle-aged man knelt beside the well and leaned in to look. Down below, the darkness seemed endless, but with a bit of effort, he was able to see something moving. It was then that the sound grew clearer. A weak cry, almost like a lament, echoed from the depths. "It's a puppy," he said, his voice filled with urgency. The crowd, which had been silent until then, began to murmur. "How did it get down there?" a woman asked. "Did it fall or was it abandoned?" The questions hung in the air, but no one had answers. What was certain was that the puppy was trapped, and time seemed to be against them. The dog, who had remained calm until that moment, began to pace back and forth, letting out small whimpers, as if pleading for someone to take action. Her desperation was clear, and it seemed to infect everyone around. "We need to get him out of there," the man said, standing up and looking at the group. "But we need to be careful." Some young people moved closer to help, while others searched their cars for flashlights and makeshift ropes. One of them, holding a cell phone, illuminated the inside of the well. Now everyone could see. The puppy was curled up in a corner, trembling. He was small, with wet and dirty fur, and his eyes shone with fear. He tried to move, but he seemed exhausted, as if he had already spent all his strength trying to escape. "He's scared," a young woman said, her voice choked. "And it looks like he's stuck on something." The middle-aged man nodded in agreement. "The well is narrow, and he won't be able to get out on his own. We need a plan." The first rescue attempts began. One of the young men tried to descend with a rope, but the space was too tight, and the risk of collapse was high. Another suggested using a long branch to try to reach the puppy, but he was too far away for that to work. With each failed attempt, the tension grew. The dog, sensing the delay, let out a loud bark, as if asking for more urgency. The man placed his hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her. "We're going to make it," he said firmly. "We just need to think together. What would you do in this situation? Have you ever faced something similar? Share how you would help." The crowd began to organize. People who had only been watching now offered assistance, suggesting ideas and searching for tools. It was as if the dog's desperation had awakened something in everyone there. The need to act, to make a difference. The man looked at the group and said, "Let's work together. We can't leave him there." And with that, the true rescue effort began. With the puppy trapped at the bottom of the well and the desperation growing by the minute, the group knew they needed to act quickly. The middle-aged man, who had assumed a sort of natural leadership, gathered everyone around to discuss a plan. "We can't go down there," he said, pointing to the narrow and unstable space. "But maybe we can lure him to a place where we can pull him up safely." A young woman in the group suggested, "What if we use something to attract him? Maybe food." The idea was met with nods of approval, but the question remained how to do that. It was then that one of the young men, who had gone to the car to fetch tools, returned with a small metal cage that he used to transport his cat. "We can use this," he said. "We put food inside and lower it carefully. If he goes in, we can pull him back." The idea seemed promising but required coordination. The middle-aged man took the cage and began to inspect it. "This will work," he said, with a confident tone. "But we need to make sure it goes down slowly and that the puppy doesn't get scared." The crowd began to mobilize. A woman brought a piece of bread and some meat she had in her bag, while another young man found a long rope in his car's trunk. The man tied the rope securely to the cage, ensuring it would remain stable during the descent. Then, he placed the food inside the cage, positioning it so that the smell could attract the puppy. "Now we need to be patient," he said as he knelt beside the well. With the help of others, he began to lower the cage slowly. The rope creaked slightly under the weight, but the process was done with extreme care. Everyone around watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the well. The dog, who had been restless until then, sat beside them, as if she understood that something was being done to save her puppy. When the cage finally reached the bottom, the man gave a gentle tug on the rope to adjust it. The puppy, who had been curled up in a corner, lifted his head, drawn by the smell of food. He took a hesitant step but stopped, still wary. "He's scared," a young woman said, watching the scene with a tight heart. "Let's give him time," the man replied, his voice patient. "He needs to feel safe." The puppy took a few more steps, slowly approaching the cage. The crowd held their breath, as if any noise could startle him. He sniffed the air, hesitated for a moment, and finally placed a paw inside the cage. "Do you think the puppy will go all the way in? Have you ever witnessed such a delicate rescue? Share what you would do in this situation." ***. The process felt like it lasted an eternity, but little by little, the puppy stepped fully into the cage, drawn by the smell of food. As soon as he was completely inside, the man signaled to the others. "Now, carefully," he said, beginning to pull the rope. The group worked together, pulling the cage slowly to avoid any sudden movements. The tension was palpable, but everyone knew they were closer to saving the little one. The silence around the well was almost absolute. Everyone was attentive, their eyes fixed on the rope that now held the small cage. The puppy, finally inside, remained curled up, still trembling but safe. The middle-aged man held the rope firmly while others positioned themselves beside him to help. "Pull slowly," he ordered, his voice firm but calm. "We can't risk the cage swinging or getting stuck." The effort began. The rope was pulled slowly, inch by inch, as the cage rose up the narrow walls of the well. The weight wasn't heavy, but the tension was enormous. Any sudden movement could scare the puppy or worse, cause the cage to get caught on a ledge. "Slower," the man said, adjusting the group's rhythm. The dog, who had been sitting beside them, stood up and began to pace back and forth again. Her eyes never left the rope, as if she understood that her puppy was on the way. Every now and then, she let out small whimpers, as if encouraging the group to keep going. "It's getting heavier," commented one of the young men, who was holding the rope beside the man. "I think the cage is hitting the walls." The man agreed and asked everyone to stop for a moment. "Let's adjust the rope," he said, leaning in to look inside the well. Carefully, he gave a gentle tug to center the cage again. "All right, continue." The process was slow and exhausting. Sweat dripped down some faces, while others exchanged worried glances. "Is he okay?" a woman asked, trying to see the puppy down below. "He is," the man replied in a reassuring tone. "We just need to keep going." With every meter the cage rose, the tension increased. At one point, the rope seemed to snag on something, and the group stopped immediately. "Calm down," the man said, taking a deep breath. He gave small tugs to free the cage while everyone held the rope tightly. After a few seconds of apprehension, the obstacle was overcome, and the rescue continued. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cage emerged from the edge of the well. The puppy was there, curled up in the corner, wide-eyed but alive. A collective sigh of relief swept over the crowd. followed by applause and emotional murmurs. The man carefully opened the cage, extending his hand to the small animal. The puppy hesitated for a moment, but upon hearing a whimper from his mother, he made a small leap out, running straight toward her. The scene that followed was heartwarming. The dog crouched down to lick the puppy, as he nestled into her chest, finally safe. Have you ever witnessed such an emotional moment? How do you think the dog felt when she saw her puppy saved? Share your thoughts. Asterisk asterisk. The crowd, which had gathered to watch the rescue, now smiled and applauded. Some discreetly wiped away tears, while others took photos to capture the moment. The middle-aged man, still holding the rope, offered a tired but satisfied smile. "We did it," he said, looking at the dog and her puppy. "They're together again." The mother and puppy stayed together for a few minutes while the crowd watched in silence, respecting that moment of reunion. No one knew exactly what had happened for the puppy to fall into the well, but everyone there was sure of one thing: the determination of that mother had saved his life. The moment of reunion between the mother and puppy seemed to freeze time. As soon as the little one came out of the cage, he ran with trembling paws toward the dog. She, who had remained restless throughout the rescue, now crouched down, her body relaxed and her eyes filled with relief. The puppy nestled into her chest, and she began to lick him gently, as if wanting to erase every second of fear and suffering he had endured. The crowd, which had previously been in a frenzy of activity, now watched in absolute silence. Some people held back tears, while others smiled, moved by the scene of pure love and maternal instinct. "She knew all along what she needed to do," a woman murmured, wiping away a tear. "She trusted us." After a few minutes of caring for her puppy, the dog lifted her head and looked around. Her gaze seemed to carry something more than mere instinct. It was as if she understood that these people had helped save her puppy. She couldn't speak, but her gratitude was clear in her eyes. She took a small step forward, looking directly at the middle-aged man who had led the rescue. He knelt down again and extended his hand, but this time not to help, but to say goodbye. "You did a good job, girl," he said, with a tired smile. The dog tilted her head slightly, as if recognizing his words. She let out a small whimper, almost as a response, and then turned her attention back to the puppy. Without warning, she gently grabbed him by the nape of his neck with her mouth, in a protective gesture, and began to walk. The crowd parted, watching as she made her way toward the trail from which she had come. Her steps were quick but steady, as if she knew exactly where she was going. "She's leaving," a young man commented, surprised. "Is she going to come back?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "No. She got what she wanted. Now it's time to move on." The dog paused briefly at the entrance of the trail, turning to look at the group one last time. It was a quick glance, but it was full of meaning. Then, without hesitation, she disappeared among the trees, carrying her puppy safely. Do you think the dog knew she was being helped? How would you interpret that final gesture? Share your thoughts. Silence returned to the area, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't one of tension, but of reflection. The crowd began to disperse slowly, many still commenting on what they had witnessed. "I'll never forget this," a woman said, holding her friend's arm. It was as if she knew exactly what she was doing from the start. The middle-aged man remained there for a few more minutes, looking at the trail where the dog had vanished. He knew that this mother had fought with all her strength to save her puppy, and that somehow she had trusted them to help her. "Animals have a wisdom we don't understand," he murmured before standing up and walking back to the road. The image of the dog and her puppy disappearing into the forest would be etched in the memory of everyone who was there. It wasn't just a story of rescue, but a lesson about courage, instinct, and the power of maternal love. We loved having you here. Subscribe to the channel and we'll meet in the next story full of emotion.